They made a critical mistake when they decided to put their hands on a decorated Army veteran who was just trying to save a life. I'm about to tell you the story of how a group of professional activists turned one man's act of compassion into a national battleground, and how that one pushed veteran turned their entire operation into his personal victory parade. That's right. They shoved a Purple Heart recipient to the ground for trying to help an ambulance reach a dying woman. But apparently they never heard the saying, never corner a soldier who's already lost everything once. Today, Marcus Rodriguez is sitting in his new office as Director of Emergency Response Coordination, while the activists who try to destroy him are explaining to federal prosecutors why their nonprofit's budget suddenly doesn't add up. Where are you watching this video from? Drop a comment below if you've ever witnessed protesters blocking emergency vehicles. I guarantee your stories can't be crazier than what I'm about to share with you. Marcus Rodriguez was 34 years old when this story began, a quiet man who worked as an EMT dispatcher in downtown Portland. Most people walking past him on the street would never guess he was a decorated Iraq War veteran with a Purple Heart, 2 Bronze Stars, and enough combat medical training to have saved dozens of lives overseas. Marcus wasn't the type to wear his service on his sleeve or demand recognition for his sacrifices. After 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, he'd come home looking for peace, not glory. His apartment was a modest 1-bedroom in the Hawthorne district, decorated with a single American flag and a photo of his unit, half of whom never made it home. Marcus had chosen Portland specifically because it was about as far from the desert warfare of the Middle East as he could imagine. The rain, the green trees, the coffee shops full of people who'd never heard incoming mortars. It was everything he dreamed about during those long nights in forward operating bases. Marcus had found his calling working as an EMT dispatcher for Portland Emergency Services. The job combined his military training in emergency medicine with his natural instinct to help people in crisis. Every day, he was the calm voice on the radio, coordinating ambulances, fire trucks, and paramedic units across the city. His colleagues respected his ability to stay cool under pressure and make split-second decisions that often meant the difference between life and death. He'd been passionate about emergency response ever since a roadside bomb in Fallujah had nearly killed him and 2 other soldiers in 2019. Marcus had managed to stop the bleeding on both men and keep them alive until the medevac helicopter arrived, earning his Purple Heart in the process. That experience had taught him something profound. In moments of true crisis, politics and ideology disappear, and all that matters is preserving human life. Marcus lived a quiet, routine life. He worked his shifts, grabbed coffee at the same corner cafe every morning, and spent weekends volunteering at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post, helping other veterans navigate the maze of VA benefits and services. He avoided political rallies, protests, and anything that might draw attention to himself. After seeing enough conflict overseas, Marcus Rodriguez just wanted to help people and be left alone. That all changed on a rainy Tuesday morning in October when a massive protest organized by the Progressive Action Coalition decided to block the intersection of Burnside and 12th Avenue during rush hour. The demonstration was led by Sarah Chun, a 29-year-old who called herself a community organizer but lived in a $3,000 per month apartment and drove a BMW her nonprofit somehow helped her afford. Beside her stood David Walsh, a 35-year-old activist with a carefully cultivated image of working-class solidarity despite his trust fund background and Columbia University degree. The protest was supposedly about transportation justice and reclaiming public spaces from car culture. But to Marcus, watching from the dispatch center, it looked like a recipe for disaster. The intersection they'd chosen to block was a critical junction for emergency vehicles trying to reach Portland General Hospital. Marcus had been dispatching ambulances through that route for 3 years and knew that blocking it could add crucial minutes to emergency response times. At 10:47 a.m., the call that would change everything came through Marcus's headset. Unit 19, we have a 67-year-old female, chest pain, difficulty breathing, possible cardiac event at the Morrison Bridge. Code 3 response. Marcus looked at his screen and felt his stomach drop. The fastest route to Portland General would take the ambulance directly through the blocked intersection where hundreds of protesters were now chanting and waving signs. Marcus immediately radioed the ambulance crew. Unit 19, be advised you have a protest blocking Burnside and 12th. Recommend alternate route via Morrison to Grand. But the driver's response made his blood run cold. Dispatch, all alternate routes are jammed due to protest traffic. We're stuck in gridlock. Patient is going into cardiac arrest. Without hesitation, Marcus grabbed his EMT credentials and rain jacket and ran the 6 blocks from the dispatch center to the protest site. He could hear the ambulance sirens wailing helplessly in the distance, trapped behind a wall of demonstrators who seemed oblivious to the emergency unfolding around them. As Marcus approached the crowd, he could see the ambulance about 2 blocks away, its lights flashing desperately as it tried to navigate through the sea of protesters who had spilled into every available lane. Marcus took a deep breath and walked calmly toward the protest leaders who were standing in the center of the intersection with megaphones and clipboards. He had no idea that in the next few minutes, his quiet life would be shattered forever, and he would become the center of a national controversy that would expose the dark truth behind America's most well-funded activist organizations. Marcus approached the cluster of protest leaders standing in the center of the intersection, his EMT credentials clearly visible on his jacket. The rain was picking up, and the sound of the trapped ambulance sirens seemed to grow more desperate with each passing second. He could see Sarah Chun commanding the crowd through her megaphone, her voice echoing off the surrounding buildings as she led chants about transportation justice. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, raising his hand to get her attention. "I'm Marcus Rodriguez with Portland Emergency Services." He held up his dispatcher credentials. "There's an ambulance trying to get to the hospital with a cardiac patient. Could you please clear a path so they can get through?" Sarah Chun looked him up and down with obvious disdain, taking in his military haircut and rain-soaked jacket. She didn't lower her megaphone. "And you are?" she asked, though he had just introduced himself. "I'm an EMT dispatcher," Marcus repeated patiently. "There's a 67-year-old woman having a heart attack, and every minute counts. The ambulance just needs a narrow lane to get through. You can continue your protest. Just move the barriers aside for 60 seconds. David Walsh stepped forward, positioning himself between Marcus and Sarah. At 6'2", with an expensive haircut and designer protest clothes, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "This is bigger than one person's medical emergency," he declared loud enough for the surrounding protesters to hear. "We're fighting systemic oppression. We can't just stop every time someone claims there's an emergency." Marcus felt his blood pressure rising, but kept his voice steady. "This isn't a claim. I can patch you through to dispatch right now. There's a woman dying 2 blocks away, and this ambulance is her only chance." Sarah Chun laughed, a sound that carried an edge of cruelty. "Your ambulance can wait. Our cause can't. We've been planning this action for months. One medical emergency doesn't override the systemic violence this city inflicts on marginalized communities every day." Behind Marcus, the crowd was growing larger and more agitated. Someone started filming him on their phone, and he could hear whispered comments about his appearance. "Look at this guy," one protester said. "Probably some right-wing veteran trying to break up our demonstration." Marcus turned to address the broader crowd, hoping to appeal to their basic humanity. "I'm not here about politics. I'm here about saving a life. I served 3 tours overseas, and I've seen what happens when medical care gets delayed. Please, just let the ambulance through." That was exactly the wrong thing to say. The mention of his military service rippled through the crowd like gasoline on a fire. David Walsh seized the moment, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "So now we have some war criminal trying to intimidate peaceful protesters. This is exactly the kind of military-industrial complex violence we're fighting against." The crowd began pressing closer, and Marcus realized he was being surrounded. Phones appeared from every direction, recording him from multiple angles. Someone started live streaming on Instagram, and Marcus could hear the narrator describing him as an aggressive veteran thug who was trying to violently disrupt their peaceful demonstration. I'm not trying to intimidate anyone. Marcus said, his military training keeping him calm even as the situation deteriorated. I'm just asking you to move aside for 1 minute so a woman doesn't die. Sarah Chun stepped closer, invading his personal space while making sure she was in frame for the cameras. This is classic concerned trolling, she announced to her audience. He's probably not even a real EMT. This is how fascists operate. They make up fake emergencies to shut down legitimate protest. Marcus pulled out his phone to show them the active dispatch call, but David Walsh knocked it out of his hand. The phone skittered across the wet pavement, and when Marcus moved to retrieve it, Walsh shoved him hard in the chest. "Don't you dare touch your phone," Walsh shouted. "You're probably calling your fascist buddies to come break up our demonstration." Marcus stumbled backward, but kept his balance. Years of combat experience had taught him how to stay calm under pressure, but the ambulance sirens were getting fainter as the crew was forced to take an even longer route. Every second that passed meant the cardiac patient was closer to death. "I'm going to move these barriers myself," Marcus said, walking toward the plastic barriers blocking the intersection. "You can arrest me afterward if you want, but I'm not letting someone die because of your protest." That's when things went completely wrong. As Marcus bent down to move the first barrier, David Walsh grabbed him from behind, while Sarah Chun shoved him hard in the face. Marcus, caught off balance, fell backward onto the wet asphalt. The crowd erupted in cheers as he hit the ground, and 6 different phones captured the moment from different angles. "Police brutality! Police brutality!" Sarah Chun screamed into her megaphone, even though Marcus wasn't a police officer. This violent veteran just attacked peaceful protesters. As Marcus struggled to his feet, his jacket torn and his hands scraped from hitting the pavement, he could see the live stream comments flooding in. #VeteranThug was already trending, with hundreds of people sharing clips of him being pushed down with captions like "Violent vet attacks peaceful protesters," and "This is what toxic masculinity looks like." But what Marcus didn't know as he walked away from that intersection, defeated and humiliated, was that those same cameras had captured something else. The clear audio of him repeatedly asking for help for a dying woman, David Walsh knocking the phone from his hand, and Sarah Chun admitting on a hot mic that she didn't care if someone died. The war had begun, and Marcus Rodriguez had just been drafted. Within hours of the confrontation, Marcus discovered just how quickly the modern media machine could destroy a person's life. He returned to his apartment that evening, exhausted and demoralized, only to find 17 missed calls on his phone and his email inbox flooded with interview requests, death threats, and messages from reporters demanding comment on his attack on peaceful protesters. The first article appeared on the Portland Tribune's website at 11:47 p.m., barely 6 hours after the incident. The headline read, "Violent Veteran Attacks Peaceful Protesters Demanding Transportation Justice." The article, written by staff reporter Janet Morrison, painted Marcus as an unstable military veteran who had aggressively confronted demonstrators and physically assaulted protest leaders who were exercising their First Amendment rights. What made Marcus's blood boil was how Morrison had completely ignored the context of the medical emergency. The ambulance wasn't mentioned until the 7th paragraph, and even then it was described as Marcus's alleged justification for disrupting the demonstration. The article quoted Sarah Chun extensively, describing her as a grassroots community organizer fighting for social justice who had been traumatized by Marcus's unprovoked aggression. "I was just standing there peacefully when this angry veteran started screaming at us," Sarah Chun was quoted as saying. "He kept getting more and more aggressive, and when we tried to de-escalate, he lunged at me. I've never been so scared in my life." It's exactly the kind of toxic masculinity and military violence that our movement is trying to address. David Walsh's quote was even more damaging. "This man represents everything wrong with how we treat veterans in this country. Instead of getting him the mental health care he clearly needs, we just let these traumatized soldiers loose on our communities." Someone could have been seriously hurt. The article went viral overnight. By morning, #VeteranThug was trending on Twitter with over 50,000 posts. Marcus watched in horror as edited clips of the confrontation spread across social media. each one carefully edited to remove his requests for help for the cardiac patient and his attempts at peaceful negotiation. The most popular version showed only David Walsh's shove, making it appear as though Marcus had been the aggressor who was justifiably pushed away. Marcus's phone rang at 6:30 a.m. It was his supervisor at Portland Emergency Services, Director Patricia Holloway, and her voice was tight with stress. "Marcus, I need you to come in immediately. We need to talk." The meeting was brief and brutal. Holloway, who had always respected Marcus's work, looked uncomfortable as she slid a termination letter across her desk. "I'm sorry, Marcus, but the city can't afford the liability risk. We've received over 200 calls since yesterday demanding your firing. The mayor's office is breathing down our necks, and several city council members are threatening to pull our funding if we don't take action." "Patricia, you know me," Marcus said, his voice barely controlled. "I've never had a single complaint in 3 years. I saved lives yesterday by trying to get that ambulance through." Holloway wouldn't meet his eyes. "I believe you, Marcus, I really do. But perception is reality in this business. The optics are terrible, and we can't have our dispatch center associated with someone who's being portrayed as a violent extremist. I'm truly sorry." As Marcus cleaned out his desk, several colleagues avoided eye contact. Only Tom Martinez, a fellow veteran who worked the night shift, came over to shake his hand. "This is bullshit, Marcus," Tom whispered. "Everyone here knows what kind of man you are. This will blow over." But it wasn't blowing over. By that afternoon, Sarah Chun had appeared on 3 local news programs, each time with a slightly different version of events that painted Marcus as increasingly dangerous. On KPTV, she claimed Marcus had threatened to hurt protesters. On Coin, she said he had used military intimidation tactics. By the time she appeared on the evening news at KGW, she was claiming Marcus had made specific threats about what he learned to do overseas. David Walsh, meanwhile, had launched a GoFundMe campaign titled Healing After Veteran Violence that described the protesters as survivors of military aggression who needed funds for trauma counseling and legal protection. The campaign raised $47,000 in its first day, with donors leaving comments like, "Thank you for standing up to military thugs," and "This is why we need to defund the Pentagon." The psychological warfare was relentless. Marcus's landlord, Mr. Yamamoto, received dozens of calls demanding Marcus's eviction. Someone posted his home address online with a caption, "Where the violent vet lives." Protesters began showing up outside his apartment building, forcing Mr. Yamamoto to hire private security. Marcus's few remaining allies began distancing themselves. The Veterans of Foreign Wars post where he volunteered asked him to take a break from his duties. His neighborhood coffee shop, Luigi's Cafe, where he'd been a regular for 2 years, posted a sign saying, "We do not serve individuals who attack peaceful protesters." The breaking point came when Marcus received a call from his sister Elena in Phoenix. She was crying. "Marcus," some reporter called Mom asking if she was worried about your violent tendencies. "She's 72 years old and has high blood pressure. She's terrified that people think her son is some kind of monster." That night, sitting alone in his apartment with the curtains drawn, Marcus felt lower than he had since his darkest days after returning from Iraq. He'd survived 3 combat tours, roadside bombs, and the deaths of close friends, but he'd never felt as helpless as he did watching his reputation and livelihood destroyed by people who had never sacrificed anything for their country. Just as Marcus was beginning to think about giving up and leaving Portland forever, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. It was Isabella Santos, a journalist he'd met at a Veterans Day event the previous year. She'd served in Afghanistan as a combat correspondent and now worked as an investigative reporter for the Portland Examiner. "Marcus," Isabella said, "I've been watching what's happening to you, and something doesn't smell right. I think you're being played by professionals. Are you willing to fight back?" Isabella Santos had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and everything about the Marcus Rodriguez story felt manufactured. As a combat correspondent in Afghanistan, she developed a keen sense for propaganda operations, and the coordinated media assault on Marcus bore all the hallmarks of a professional disinformation campaign. Meet me at Powell's Books tomorrow at 2 p.m., Isabella told Marcus. Section M, Military History. And Marcus? Don't trust anyone else right now. This goes deeper than you think. Isabella spent that night doing what she did best, following the money. Starting with the Progressive Action Coalition's public tax filings, she began tracing the financial network behind Sarah Chun and David Walsh. What she found made her blood run cold. The Progressive Action Coalition wasn't the grassroots organization it claimed to be. According to IRS Form 990 filings, the group had received $2.3 million in donations the previous year, with the largest contributions coming from three sources: the Social Justice Alliance, $800,000, Urban Reform Initiative, $650,000, and something called the Meridian Foundation, $500,000. Isabella had investigated the Social Justice Alliance before. Despite its progressive-sounding name, it was funded primarily by tech billionaire Harrison Wade, who had made his fortune developing surveillance software for authoritarian governments. The Urban Reform Initiative was even more suspicious, a dark money group that funneled cash from real estate developers who specialized in gentrifying low-income neighborhoods. But the Meridian Foundation was the real smoking gun. Isabella's database searches revealed that Meridian was a pass-through organization that laundered money from Blackstone Real Estate Partners, one of the largest commercial property investment firms in the Pacific Northwest. Blackstone had been quietly buying up properties in Portland's downtown corridor, waiting for the right moment to redevelop them into luxury condominiums and office complexes. When Marcus arrived at Powell's the next day, Isabella was already deep in a stack of financial documents. She looked up as he approached, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the way he kept checking over his shoulder. "You look like hell," she said bluntly. "Good. That means you're taking this seriously." Isabella spread the documents across a small table in the corner of the military history section. "Marcus, you weren't randomly targeted by some passionate activists. You were professionally destroyed by a multi-million-dollar operation designed to clear opposition to a real estate development project." She showed him the financial flow charts she'd created overnight. Sarah Chun isn't some grassroots organizer. She's paid $147,000 a year by the Progressive Action Coalition, plus benefits and a housing allowance. David Walsh pulls down $89,000 as a community engagement specialist. These people are professional protesters, and their job is to create chaos that drives down property values so their corporate sponsors can buy cheap. Marcus studied the documents, his military intelligence training kicking in. "You're saying the ambulance thing was intentional? They wanted a confrontation?" "I'm saying they've done this before," Isabella replied, pulling out another folder. "Look at this pattern. In the last 2 years, the Progressive Action Coalition has organized disruptive protests in 5 different Portland neighborhoods. In every case, small businesses closed, property values dropped 15 to 20%, and within 6 months, Blackstone Real Estate Partners swooped in to buy properties at below-market prices." She showed him photographs from previous protests. Southeast Morrison Street, last spring. They blocked traffic for 3 weeks, claiming it was about pedestrian safety. 2 family restaurants went out of business because customers couldn't reach them. Blackstone bought both buildings for 60 cents on the dollar and turned them into luxury lofts. Marcus felt sick as the scope of the operation became clear. So the intersection they chose is right in the middle of the next gentrification target zone, Isabella finished. There are 12 locally owned businesses within a 3-block radius that would be perfect for redevelopment. The protest was designed to create ongoing chaos in that area until the businesses either fail or sell cheap. Isabella pulled out her laptop and showed Marcus a private social media group she'd infiltrated. "This is where they coordinate. Look at this post from 3 days before your confrontation." The post, from an account called Serenity Organizer, read, "Team meeting tomorrow. We need to discuss escalation strategies for the Burnside action. Remember, we're not just protesting, we're reshaping the neighborhood's future. Any confrontation that generates media coverage helps our long-term goals." They were planning for confrontation, Marcus realized. They wanted someone to try to stop them. And when you showed up as a veteran asking them to let an ambulance through, you became their perfect villain, Isabella said. Military veteran attacks peaceful protesters. It's a narrative that writes itself and generates maximum sympathy for their cause. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it and swore under her breath. My editor just killed my story. Says the publisher doesn't want to platform conspiracy theories against legitimate activists. Let me guess, Marcus said bitterly. Someone made a phone call. Probably several phone calls, backed up by threats to pull advertising. Isabella closed her laptop with a snap. But I've been freelancing for 10 years, and I don't need the Portland Examiner to publish this story. She looked at Marcus intently. The question is, how badly do you want to fight back? Because taking on a multi-million-dollar operation with corporate backing and media connections isn't going to be easy. They'll come at you with everything they have. Marcus thought about his sister's phone call, his mother's fears, and the way his former colleagues had avoided eye contact as he cleaned out his desk. Then he thought about the elderly woman who'd had the heart attack and how Sarah Chun had laughed when he'd begged for help. What do you need from me? He asked. Isabella smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. I need you to help me prove that these people aren't activists. They're mercenaries. And I need you to trust me when I tell you that the truth is going to be bigger and uglier than either of us imagined. Isabella's investigation had given Marcus the ammunition he needed, but fighting a multi-million-dollar operation required more than just one person with the truth. Marcus knew from his military experience that successful operations require the right team, and he was about to call in reinforcements. The first person Marcus contacted was Tommy Chun, no relation to Sarah despite sharing the same last name. Tommy was a former Army cyber warfare specialist who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before Marcus ever arrived in country. After discharge, Tommy had parlayed his military tech skills into a successful cybersecurity consulting business, but he'd never forgotten the brotherhood of veterans who'd served overseas. Rodriguez. Tommy's voice boomed through the phone when Marcus called. I saw that bullshit on the news. Man, I've been waiting for you to call. What can I do? Marcus explained the situation while Tommy listened in increasingly outraged silence. When Marcus finished, Tommy was quiet for a long moment before responding. So, these fake activists destroyed your life to help some real estate company make money? Brother, you know I'm in. When do we start? Next, Marcus reached out to Maria Gonzalez, a former Navy intelligence officer he'd met at a Veterans Day event 2 years earlier. Maria had transitioned from military service to working as a private investigator, specializing in corporate fraud and background investigations. Her military training and human intelligence gathering made her exceptionally skilled at infiltrating organizations and uncovering secrets. Marcus, I've been following your story, Maria said when he called. Something about it stunk from day one. These people moved too fast, too coordinated. Professional activists don't usually have their media strategy that polished unless they're being coached. Maria agreed to meet Marcus and Isabella that evening at a small Vietnamese restaurant in southeast Portland, away from the downtown area where Marcus might be recognized. Over pho and spring rolls, the 3 veterans and 1 journalist began planning their counteroffensive. We need to think like this is a military operation, Marcus said, his strategic training kicking in. They have superior resources and media connections, but they also have vulnerabilities. Isabella's already found their financial pressure points. Now we need to find their operational weaknesses. Isabella spread out photos and documents across the table. I've been monitoring their social media accounts and public schedules. Sarah Chun has a pattern. She does a planning meeting every Tuesday at 7 p.m. at the Community Action Center on Hawthorne. David Walsh usually shows up, plus 4 or 5 other regular organizers. That's our target, Maria said immediately. If I can get inside one of those meetings, I can learn their next moves and maybe pick up some intelligence on their funding sources. Tommy pulled out his laptop. While Maria is working the human intelligence angle, I can handle the digital side. These people probably think they're being smart with their communications, but I guarantee they're making basic operational security mistakes. Most civilian organizations do. The team's first break came when Marcus remembered something Isabella had mentioned. The elderly woman who'd had the heart attack during the protest. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson had survived her cardiac episode and been released from the hospital after a week of recovery. Marcus realized she might be their most powerful ally. Mrs. Patterson almost died because of their protest. Marcus explained to the group, "If we can get her to tell her story, it provides the human cost that the media has been ignoring." Isabella nodded enthusiastically. A sympathetic victim trumps political narratives every time. If we can get Mrs. Patterson on camera talking about how these protesters nearly killed her, it changes the entire dynamic. The next day, Marcus and Isabella visited Mrs. Patterson at her modest home in the Selwood neighborhood. She was a retired elementary school teacher who lived with her daughter Karen, a nurse at Portland General Hospital. Both women welcomed Marcus warmly once they learned who he was. "You're the young man who tried to help the ambulance reach me," Mrs. Patterson said, grasping Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "Karen told me what really happened. Those protesters should be ashamed of themselves." Karen Patterson's anger was even more intense than her mother's. "I work in a cardiac unit, and I know exactly what a 10-minute delay means for heart attack patients. Mom was lucky, but the next person might not be. Those protesters have blood on their hands." Mrs. Patterson revealed something that stunned the group. Her late husband had been a real estate developer, and she recognized the gentrification patterns Isabella had uncovered. "Harold used to talk about operations like this," she explained. "Create a crisis, drive out the locals, buy cheap, develop expensive. It's an old trick, but it works because most people don't see the big picture." Even better, Mrs. Patterson had resources. Her late husband's construction company had been successful, and she had both financial means and community connections that could prove invaluable. "If these people think they can use my near-death experience to make money, they have another thing coming," she declared with the steely determination that had made her a successful teacher for 30 years. The team's plan began taking shape. Maria would infiltrate the activist planning meetings to gather intelligence on their next moves. Tommy would conduct digital surveillance on their communications and financial transactions. Isabella would continue investigating the corporate backing while preparing to publish her exposé through alternative media channels. Mrs. Patterson would serve as their public face, giving them credibility and sympathy that the activists couldn't attack without looking heartless. But Marcus would serve as the operational coordinator, using his military planning skills to anticipate the activists' moves and prepare countermeasures. "They think they destroyed an isolated veteran," Marcus told the group as they finalized their strategy. "What they actually did was declare war on a team of highly trained professionals who know how to fight back." The meeting ended with everyone clear on their roles. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Patterson pulled Marcus aside. "Young man, I want you to know something. Harold would have been proud to see a veteran standing up for what's right. You're fighting for more than just your reputation. You're fighting for every honest person these people have hurt." Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since the confrontation began: hope. For the first time since being pushed to the ground outside that intersection, he wasn't fighting alone. The counter-operation launched with military precision the following week. Maria Gonzalez had successfully infiltrated the Progressive Action Coalition by posing as a newcomer to Portland who was passionate about social justice. Her cover story was perfect. Recently divorced tech worker from San Francisco, relocated to Portland for a fresh start, eager to get involved in local activism. The activists welcomed her with open arms, never suspecting they were being surveilled by a former naval intelligence officer. Maria's first breakthrough came during her second planning meeting at the Community Action Center. She'd worn a concealed recording device, perfectly legal in Oregon, which allows one-party consent for recordings and captured devastating evidence of the activists' true agenda. "We need to keep the pressure up on the Burnside corridor," Sarachin said during the meeting, her voice crisp and businesslike. "The restaurant owners are starting to cave. 2 more businesses have put up for sale signs this week." David Walsh's response was even more damning. "Good. The sooner we clear out these mom-and-pop operations, the sooner our partners can move in." Harrison Wade's people are getting impatient about the timeline. Maria nearly gasped when she heard Harrison Wade's name mentioned so casually. Wade was the tech billionaire Isabella had identified as a major funder, but hearing his name connected directly to the property acquisition strategy was smoking gun evidence. The meeting revealed their next target, the Eastside Community Center, a nonprofit that provided services to homeless veterans and low-income families. The building occupied a prime corner lot that would be perfect for luxury condominiums, and the activists were planning a campaign to portray the center as a magnet for crime and drug activity. We start with noise complaints and safety concerns, Sarah Chan explained to the group. Document every police call, every ambulance visit. Build a case that the community center is bringing down property values and threatening public safety. While Maria gathered human intelligence, Tommy Chun was conducting his own digital surveillance operation. Using techniques he'd learned in military cyber warfare, Tommy had gained access to the activists' private communications and financial records. What he found was a sophisticated money laundering operation that went far beyond what Isabella had initially uncovered. The Progressive Action Coalition was just one of 12 similar organizations across the Pacific Northwest, all funded by the same network of corporate donors and all targeting neighborhoods for gentrification. These people are running a coordinated campaign across 4 states, Tommy told Marcus as they reviewed the digital evidence. Portland, Seattle, Spokane, and Boise. Same playbook every time. Manufactured protests, media manipulation, property acquisition. They've displaced over 200 small businesses and 1,500 families in the last 3 years. Tommy had also discovered something personally infuriating: David Walsh's criminal background that had been carefully hidden. Walsh had been arrested for assault in 3 different states, including a case in Colorado where he'd attacked a disabled veteran who'd questioned his protest tactics. Each time, the charges had been quietly dropped after Walsh's employers made substantial donations to local political campaigns. Meanwhile, Isabella was preparing her exposé with the help of Mrs. Patterson, who had agreed to go on record about her near-death experience. The elderly woman's testimony was devastating in its simplicity and moral clarity. "I was dying," Mrs. Patterson said into Isabella's camera. "The paramedics told me later that every minute of delay increased my chance of death. But when that young veteran asked those protesters to move aside so the ambulance could reach me, they laughed at him. They said their protest was more important than my life." Mrs. Patterson's daughter Karen provided medical expertise that made the case even stronger. "As a cardiac nurse, I can tell you that my mother's survival was a miracle. The delayed response should have killed her. These protesters aren't heroes. They're people who nearly murdered my mother for their political agenda." The team's investigation also uncovered other victims of the Progressive Action Coalition's operations. Tommy had found social media posts from displaced business owners across the city, all telling similar stories of protests that had driven away customers until they were forced to close or sell. One particularly heartbreaking case involved the Morales family, who had run a small Mexican restaurant in southeast Portland for 15 years. Progressive Action Coalition protests outside their restaurant, supposedly about worker exploitation, had continued for 6 weeks until the family savings were exhausted and they lost the business. "They killed our American dream," Rosa Morales told Isabella in a recorded interview. 30 years we worked to build something for our children, and these people destroyed it in 2 months with their lies." But the activists weren't sitting idle while Marcus's team gathered evidence. Sarah Chun and David Walsh had noticed Maria at the meetings and were beginning to suspect her motives. They'd also launched a new social media campaign against Marcus, posting his home address and encouraging direct action against him. The harassment escalated when protesters began showing up at Marcus's apartment building at all hours, chanting slogans and leaving threatening messages. His landlord, Mr. Yamamoto, was caught in the middle, facing pressure from both the activists and his other tenants who were being disrupted by the protests. The breaking point came when Tommy's digital surveillance picked up planning for what the activists called Operation Veteran Down, a coordinated campaign to completely destroy Marcus's reputation and drive him out of Portland permanently. They're planning to plant drugs in his apartment and then tip off the police, Tommy warned Marcus urgently. "We intercepted encrypted messages about creating evidence of criminal activity." Marcus felt the familiar cold focus of combat alertness settling over him. The enemy had revealed their next move, which meant it was time for his team to spring their trap. How long before they're ready to move? Marcus asked. 24 hours, maybe less, Tommy replied. Marcus looked around at his team. Isabella with her journalistic integrity, Maria with her intelligence training, Tommy with his technical skills, and Mrs. Patterson with her moral authority. They were outnumbered and outfunded, but they had something the activists didn't: the truth and the skills to fight for it. Then it's time to show them what happens when you mess with the wrong veteran. Marcus's military training had taught him that the best defense was often a carefully planned offense. And with Tommy's intelligence about Operation Veteran Down, he knew exactly when and how to strike back. But first, he needed to set the perfect trap, one that would expose the activists' true nature to the entire country. The opportunity came when Maria's surveillance revealed the activists' most ambitious and morally reprehensible plan yet. During her third infiltration meeting, she learned that Sarah Chun and David Walsh were planning to disrupt the annual Memorial Day service at Lone Fir Cemetery, Portland's historic Veterans Memorial, where over 400 Civil War veterans were buried alongside soldiers from every American conflict since. Memorial Day is the perfect target, Sarah Chun had announced to the planning group, her voice filled with excitement. All those flag-waving patriots gathered in one place, celebrating American militarism. We need to educate them about the reality of what their precious military has done overseas. David Walsh's contribution was even more disturbing. I've been researching the veterans who will be speaking. Half of them are probably war criminals. We should make them confront the innocent people they killed abroad. Maria had to bite her tongue to keep from responding. As a Navy veteran who'd lost friends in Afghanistan, hearing these privileged activists plan to desecrate a memorial service made her physically sick. But she maintained her cover, even volunteering to help with logistics to gather more intelligence. The activists' plan was elaborate and designed for maximum disruption. They intended to surround the memorial service with protesters carrying signs depicting graphic images from overseas conflicts, complete with bullhorns and chanting designed to drown out the ceremony. They'd recruited over 200 activists from across the Pacific Northwest, many of whom would be paid $200 each for their participation. But the most offensive part of their plan involved directly confronting Gold Star families, parents who had lost children in military service. Sarah Chun wanted activists to approach grieving mothers and demand they acknowledge the victims of American imperialism their children had supposedly created. We need to make them uncomfortable, Sarah Chun had explained. These people think they can mourn their dead soldiers without considering the foreign civilians who died because of American aggression. It's time for some difficult conversations. When Maria reported this intelligence to Marcus, his reaction was controlled fury. They want to attack Gold Star mothers at a memorial service? These people have no idea what they're about to unleash. Marcus immediately began coordinating with Tommy to ensure comprehensive documentation of the planned disruption. Tommy had already hacked into the activist communication networks and was monitoring their coordination in real time. Every text message, every social media post, every encrypted chat was being recorded and preserved. They're using an app called Secure Chat for their most sensitive communications, Tommy explained to the team during an emergency meeting. They think it's anonymous, but I've been inside their network for weeks. I have everything: payment records, coordination instructions, even the specific talking points they're supposed to use when confronting families. Isabella had been coordinating with national media outlets, building on the relationships she'd developed during her military journalism career. 60 Minutes is interested, she told the group. So is CNN and Fox News. If we can document these activists disrupting a veterans memorial service, it'll be front-page news across the country. Mrs. Patterson, meanwhile, had been mobilizing the veteran community through her late husband's business connections and her own social networks. Word was spreading through veterans of foreign wars posts, American Legion chapters, and informal veteran networks across Oregon and Washington. I've never seen anything like it, Mrs. Patterson reported. When veterans heard that protesters were planning to disrupt Memorial Day services, the response was immediate. We'll have over 500 veterans there, including Medal of Honor recipients and Gold Star families. The trap was set with military precision. Marcus had coordinated with Portland police, providing them with intelligence about the activists' plans and ensuring adequate security for the memorial service. He'd also reached out to veterans organizations nationwide who were sending representatives to witness and document whatever unfolded. Tommy had positioned hidden cameras throughout the cemetery, ensuring that every angle of the confrontation would be captured in high definition. Maria would be embedded with the activists, wearing a wire to record their private conversations and coordination. Isabella had arranged for live streaming of the event, with multiple news outlets prepared to broadcast the confrontation as it happened. But Marcus had also prepared a surprise that would expose the activists' true nature more powerfully than any hidden camera could. Through Mrs. Patterson's connections, he'd arranged for 3 Gold Star mothers to attend the service. Women who had lost sons in Iraq and Afghanistan and were prepared to speak publicly about the impact of their sacrifice. One of these women was Margaret Sullivan, whose 19-year-old son Michael had been killed by an IED in Afghanistan while providing medical aid to local civilians. Michael Sullivan had been posthumously awarded the Bronze Star for heroism, having died while trying to save an Afghan child who'd been injured in the attack. If these protesters want to tell me my son was a war criminal, Margaret Sullivan told Marcus during their preparation meeting, they can do it on national television. Let the whole country see what kind of people attack grieving mothers. The memorial service was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Memorial Day morning. Sarah Chin's disruption was planned to begin at 10:15 a.m., right during the moment of silence for fallen soldiers. Marcus's team would be ready with cameras, recordings, and witnesses to document everything. As Marcus reviewed the final preparations the night before Memorial Day, he felt the same focused calm he'd experienced before combat operations overseas. The enemy had revealed their plan, his team was prepared, and justice was about to be served. Tomorrow, Marcus told his assembled team, we show the country who these people really are. Memorial Day morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect spring weather that made Portland look like a postcard. By 9:30 a.m., Lone Fir Cemetery was filled with hundreds of people gathered to honor America's fallen soldiers. Veterans in uniform stood alongside elderly family members, young children carrying small American flags, and Gold Star mothers clutching photos of sons and daughters who would never come home. Marcus arrived early, wearing his dress uniform for the first time since leaving the military. The ribbons on his chest told the story of his service. The Purple Heart, 2 Bronze Stars, the combat medical badge. He'd chosen to wear his decorations not for recognition, but as armor against what was about to unfold. Margaret Sullivan stood near the memorial's central monument, holding a framed photograph of her son Michael in his Army dress blues. At 52, she was an elementary school principal who had spent the 3 years since Michael's death channeling her grief into supporting other Gold Star families. Today, she was prepared to face whatever the protesters threw at her. I'm not here for politics, she told Marcus as they reviewed the final plan. I'm here because my son died believing he was protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. If these protesters want to spit on his memory, they can explain themselves to his mother on live television. Tommy had positioned himself in the cemetery's maintenance building, where he had access to all the hidden cameras and could monitor the activists' digital communications in real time. His equipment was recording everything: video, audio, text messages, social media posts. Nothing would escape documentation. Maria was embedded with the activist group as they assembled in Laurel Hills Park, 6 blocks from the cemetery. Her wire was transmitting every word of their final preparations, and what she heard made her sick to her stomach. Remember, the goal is maximum disruption, Sarah Chan was telling the group of 180 protesters who had gathered from across the region. These people think they can celebrate American militarism without consequences. We're here to educate them about the real cost of their precious wars. David Walsh had brought professional agitators from Seattle and San Francisco, including several activists with extensive arrest records. If anyone tries to stop us, we defend ourselves, he announced. These veterans think their uniforms make them special, but we're not intimidated by their military bullshit. Isabella was positioned with the national media crews that had assembled to cover the story. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and local Portland stations all had cameras ready. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation as word spread about the planned confrontation. The memorial service began at 10 a.m. with a color guard presenting the flags and a local minister offering an invocation. The crowd of over 400 veterans and family members stood in respectful silence as the names of local fallen soldiers were read aloud. The ceremony had a sacred quality that touched even the media representatives covering the event. At exactly 10:15 a.m., during the moment of silence for fallen soldiers, the activist struck. Sarah Chun led the charge with a bullhorn, marching into the cemetery while chanting, "No more war, no more lies." Behind her came 180 protesters carrying signs with graphic images from overseas conflicts and slogans like, "Your heroes are war criminals," and "American soldiers equals global terrorists." The contrast was immediately stark and visible to every camera present. On one side stood veterans in uniform, elderly family members, and children holding small flags in respectful silence. On the other side were aggressive protesters with bullhorns, shouting slogans designed to disrupt a sacred ceremony. But the activists made their first critical mistake within moments of arriving. Instead of staying in a designated protest area, they pushed directly into the crowd of mourning families, surrounding elderly veterans in wheelchairs and getting in the faces of Gold Star mothers. David Walsh spotted Margaret Sullivan holding her son's photograph and made a beeline for her, his voice carrying clearly to the dozens of cameras now focused on the confrontation. "How many innocent children did your son kill?" Walsh shouted at the grieving mother. "How many families did he destroy with American bombs? You're mourning a murderer." Margaret Sullivan's response was captured by every news camera present. With quiet dignity that made Walsh's aggression look even more obscene, she held up her son's photograph and spoke directly into the nearest microphone. "My son Michael died trying to save an Afghan child who was wounded in a terrorist attack. He was 19 years old, and he gave his life protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. This man is attacking a mother at her child's memorial service." The crowd of veterans began forming a protective barrier around the Gold Star families, but they did so without violence or aggression. Marcus had coordinated this response in advance. Let the activists reveal their true nature while the veterans demonstrated honor and restraint. Sarah Chun, seeing that her disruption wasn't generating the desired chaos, escalated further. She physically pushed past an elderly veteran in a wheelchair to get closer to the memorial wreath, shouting into her bullhorn just inches from the faces of grieving family members. "This whole ceremony is propaganda," she screamed. "You're celebrating mass murderers. Your precious soldiers are terrorists with government approval." That's when 82-year-old Korean War veteran Robert Hayes, confined to a wheelchair and wearing his service medals, looked directly at Sarah Chun and spoke words that would be replayed on news broadcasts for weeks. "Young lady, I watched my friends die on foreign soil so that people like you would have the freedom to say what you just said. I don't agree with you, but I fought for your right to speak. The question is, do you have enough honor to let us mourn our dead in peace?" The moment was captured in perfect clarity by Tommy's cameras and broadcast live across the nation. An 82-year-old disabled veteran showing grace and dignity to protesters who were screaming in his face while disrupting his fallen comrades' memorial service. America was watching, and the activists had just revealed exactly who they really were. The video of David Walsh screaming at Gold Star Mother Margaret Sullivan went viral faster than any political content in recent memory. Within 6 hours of the Memorial Day confrontation, the footage had been viewed over 15 million times across all platforms. By the end of the day, it had reached 50 million views, with comment sections exploding in outrage at the activist behavior. The clip that generated the most fury was a 47-second segment showing Walsh shouting, "You're mourning a murderer," at Margaret Sullivan while she held her son's photograph, followed immediately by her dignified response about Michael dying to save an Afghan child. The contrast between Walsh's aggression and Sullivan's grace created a moment of moral clarity that transcended political divisions. Marcus watched the social media explosion from Tommy's apartment, where the team had gathered to monitor the aftermath. The hashtags #RespectOurFallen and #ShaneyandSarah were trending nationwide, while #VeteranThug, the hashtag that had destroyed Marcus's reputation, was being overwhelmed by supporters defending him. "Look at this," Tommy said, scrolling through his feeds. Even celebrities who usually stay out of politics are weighing in. The Rock just posted a video supporting veterans and Gold Star families. Ellen DeGeneres shared the clip of that Korean War veteran. This has gone way beyond Portland. The mainstream media reaction was swift and decisive. Anderson Cooper opened his CNN show that evening with the Memorial Day footage, calling the activist's behavior a disgraceful attack on grieving families that should shame every American. Fox News ran the story as their lead for 3 consecutive hours, with commentators expressing bipartisan outrage at the disruption of a sacred ceremony. But it was the reaction from unexpected sources that truly showed how dramatically public opinion had shifted. Progressive politicians who had previously supported the activists began distancing themselves from the Memorial Day actions. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, despite her liberal credentials, tweeted, "Protesting government policies is our right. Attacking grieving mothers at memorial services crosses every line of human decency." Sarah Chun and David Walsh found themselves becoming national symbols of extremism overnight. The video of Sarah Chun shoving past an elderly veteran in a wheelchair while screaming through a bullhorn created an image that perfectly captured the activist's callous disregard for basic human dignity. Corporate sponsors began fleeing from the Progressive Action Coalition faster than rats from a sinking ship. By Tuesday morning, Tommy had documented $2.3 million in canceled funding commitments as companies scrambled to avoid association with the Memorial Day debacle. Harrison Wade, the tech billionaire who had been secretly funding the activist network, issued a public statement claiming he was shocked and dismayed by the activist behavior and announcing the immediate suspension of all funding to the Progressive Action Coalition. It was a transparent attempt to distance himself from the controversy, but Isabella had already documented his direct involvement in planning the gentrification schemes. Maria's surveillance recordings from inside the activist network proved devastating when Isabella began releasing them strategically throughout the week. The audio of Sarah Chun planning to educate Gold Star families about their children being war criminals was played on every major news program, generating fresh waves of outrage. Even more damaging was David Walsh's recorded statement about veterans being probably war criminals who needed to confront the innocent people they killed abroad. When that audio was paired with video of him attacking Margaret Sullivan, it created a narrative so toxic that even his most loyal supporters abandoned him. The activist's attempt to control the damage only made things worse. Sarah Chun appeared on several news programs trying to defend the Memorial Day actions, but each appearance was a disaster. On MSNBC, she insisted that military families need to acknowledge the violence their loved ones perpetrated overseas, a statement so tone-deaf that even the progressive host visibly recoiled. David Walsh's media appearances were even more catastrophic. During a CNN interview, he doubled down on his attacks against Gold Star families, claiming that American soldiers are responsible for more civilian deaths than any terrorist organization. The interviewer, clearly appalled, ended the segment early, but not before Walsh had further cemented his reputation as someone who attacks grieving mothers. The legal consequences began piling up as well. Portland police announced they were investigating the activists for disturbing the peace and harassment of elderly and disabled veterans. The American Legion filed a civil lawsuit against the Progressive Action Coalition for deliberately disrupting a lawful memorial service and causing emotional distress to Gold Star families. Mrs. Patterson's family, working with Isabella, had compiled evidence of the activists' broader real estate manipulation scheme and turned it over to the FBI's white-collar crime division. Federal investigators were now looking into potential wire fraud, conspiracy, and tax evasion charges related to the misuse of nonprofit donations for commercial real estate schemes. But perhaps the most satisfying development for Marcus was the grassroots response from veterans and military families across the country. The veterans of foreign wars announced a nationwide boycott of any business that had supported the Progressive Action Coalition. American Legion posts from coast to coast organized counter-demonstrations wherever the activists tried to hold events. Marcus received thousands of supportive messages from veterans, military families, and ordinary Americans who had been disgusted by the Memorial Day footage. Job offers poured in from across the country. Emergency services departments, veteran organizations, and private companies all wanted to hire the veteran who had become a symbol of dignity under attack. The transformation in media coverage was complete. The same Portland Tribune that had labeled Marcus a violent veteran now ran an editorial praising his restraint and professionalism in the face of unconscionable provocation. The reporter who had written the original hit piece, Janet Morrison, was quietly reassigned to cover city council meetings instead of major stories. Most importantly, the truth about Marcus's original confrontation was finally being told accurately. The full video of his polite request for help reaching a cardiac patient was being shown alongside the activist's callous dismissal of a medical emergency. Americans could see for themselves who had been the aggressor and who had been trying to save a life. As Marcus watched Sarah Chin's latest disastrous television appearance, he felt a sense of justice that went beyond personal vindication. The Memorial Day confrontation had exposed not just these particular activists, but the entire cynical industry of manufactured outrage that preyed on American communities for profit. They picked the wrong fight, Marcus told his team as they watched the activists' world collapse around them. You don't attack Gold Star mothers and expect America to stay silent. 3 weeks after the Memorial Day disaster, the legal hammer began falling on Sarah Chun, David Walsh, and the entire Progressive Action Coalition network. The FBI's investigation had uncovered a web of financial fraud that went far beyond what even Isabella's thorough reporting had revealed. Federal prosecutors announced the first round of indictments on a Tuesday morning in June. Sarah Chun was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and misappropriation of charitable funds. The indictment detailed how she had diverted over $400,000 in nonprofit donations to her personal use, including luxury vacations, designer clothing, and a BMW that was supposedly for organizational outreach. David Walsh faced even more serious charges, including multiple counts of assault, harassment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. His criminal background, which Tommy had uncovered weeks earlier, proved to be the tip of the iceberg. FBI investigators had found evidence of assault charges in 5 different states, all of which had been dismissed after his employers made strategic donations to local political campaigns. But the most shocking revelation came when prosecutors revealed the scope of the real estate manipulation scheme. The Progressive Action Coalition wasn't just one corrupt organization. It was part of a coordinated network of fake activist groups operating across the Pacific Northwest, all designed to artificially drive down property values for corporate real estate acquisition. Marcus was asked to testify before a congressional subcommittee investigating the misuse of nonprofit organizations for commercial profit. The hearing, broadcast live on C-SPAN, gave him a national platform to tell his story and expose the broader pattern of manufactured activism. Congressman, Marcus said during his testimony, "What happened to me in Portland wasn't random. It was a deliberate strategy to silence anyone who might oppose their real estate scheme. They didn't just attack me. They attacked every veteran, every small business owner, and every working family that stood in the way of their corporate partners' profits." The congressional hearing revealed documents showing that Blackstone Real Estate Partners had paid over $15 million to various activist organizations across Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and California. In each case, the playbook was identical. Create artificial controversy, drive out local businesses, acquire property at below-market prices, and develop luxury housing that displaced working families. Margaret Sullivan also testified, delivering devastating testimony about how the activist had turned her son's memorial service into a platform for their political agenda. Her words, delivered with the quiet strength that had made her original confrontation with David Walsh so powerful, left several congressmen visibly moved. "My son died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves," she told the subcommittee. He would be horrified to know that his memorial service was used as a weapon in someone's real estate scheme. "These people have no shame, no decency, and no respect for the sacrifices our military families have made." The legal consequences for the activists came swiftly. Sarah Chun accepted a plea deal that included 18 months in federal prison and restitution payments to the organizations and individuals she had defrauded. She was also banned from serving in any leadership role in nonprofit organizations for 10 years. David Walsh, facing more serious charges and with his extensive criminal history working against him, was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison after rejecting a plea deal. The judge, a Vietnam veteran himself, made clear his disgust with Walsh's behavior during sentencing. "Mr. Walsh, you have made a career of attacking the very people who sacrificed to protect your right to protest," Judge Harrison said. "Your assault on a Gold Star mother at her son's memorial service represents a level of callousness that shocks the conscience. This court will not tolerate the weaponization of activism for personal profit." The Progressive Action Coalition was formally dissolved after federal investigators froze all of its assets. The IRS revoked its nonprofit status and imposed substantial penalties for the misuse of tax-exempt donations. Several other activist organizations in the network also lost their nonprofit status as the investigation expanded. Harrison Wade, the tech billionaire who had funded the operation, faced his own legal troubles. While he avoided criminal charges by cooperating with federal investigators, he was forced to pay $25 million in civil penalties and agreed to a consent decree prohibiting him from funding similar operations in the future. Blackstone Real Estate Partners settled a massive class action lawsuit filed by displaced businesses and families across the Pacific Northwest. The settlement, worth over $100 million, provided compensation to everyone who had been harmed by the artificial activist campaigns, designed to manipulate property values. For Marcus, vindication came in forms both legal and personal. The city of Portland issued a formal apology for his wrongful termination and offered him a position as Director of Emergency Response Coordination, with a salary significantly higher than his previous dispatcher role. Mayor Williams personally delivered the apology, acknowledging that the city had been manipulated by the activists' false narrative. "Marcus Rodriguez represents the best of what we want in public service," Mayor Williams said during a press conference. "He was punished for trying to save a life, and our city failed him. We're honored that he's willing to continue serving Portland despite how poorly we treated him." Marcus's new role gave him the authority to implement reforms in emergency response protocols, ensuring that political protests could never again interfere with medical emergencies. His first initiative was the Clear Path Protocol, requiring that all permitted demonstrations include designated emergency vehicle lanes and trained marshals to assist first responders. The veterans community rallied around Marcus in ways that went far beyond his legal vindication. The Veterans of Foreign Wars awarded him their highest civilian honor for his exceptional service to veterans and military families. The American Legion created the Marcus Rodriguez Award for Veterans Advocacy to be given annually to someone who exemplifies courage in defending veteran rights. Isabella's investigative reporting on the case won a Pulitzer Prize for public service, with a citation praising her courageous exposure of the exploitation of social justice movements for corporate profit. She used her newfound prominence to launch an investigative newsletter focused on exposing astroturfing operations across the country. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Michael Sullivan's former unit in Afghanistan pooled their resources to commission a bronze plaque honoring both Michael's sacrifice and Marcus's defense of his memory. The plaque was installed at Lone Fir Cemetery, where it serves as a permanent reminder that some principles are worth fighting for. Standing at that memorial on the first anniversary of the confrontation, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. He'd gone from being a quiet dispatcher who just wanted to help people to becoming a national symbol of integrity under fire. "Sometimes," he told Margaret Sullivan as they stood together at her son's memorial, You don't choose your battles. They choose you. 6 months after the Memorial Day confrontation that changed everything, Marcus Rodriguez stood in the conference room of Portland's new Veterans Community Response Center, looking at a map dotted with pins representing successful operations across the Pacific Northwest. What had started as one veteran's fight for justice had grown into a nationwide movement to protect communities from manufactured activism and corporate manipulation. The Veterans Community Response Network, which Marcus had established with Mrs. Patterson's support and Isabella's media expertise, now operated in 30 states. The organization trained veterans to identify and counter astroturfing operations, fake grassroots movements designed to advance corporate interests at the expense of local communities. We've got 3 new requests this week, Tommy Chin reported during the weekly strategy meeting. Tommy had left his cybersecurity consulting business to become the network's director of digital intelligence, using his military cyber warfare skills to track and expose artificial activist campaigns. There's a suspicious environmental group in Boise that's trying to shut down a family farm, a social justice organization in Denver that's targeting a veteran-owned coffee shop, and something in Nashville that looks exactly like the Portland operation. Maria Gonzalez, now the network's director of field operations, pulled up files on her laptop. The Nashville situation is particularly interesting. Same playbook, same funding sources, even some of the same paid activists we documented in Portland. It's like they took the Progressive Action Coalition manual and just changed the location. The success of the Veterans Community Response Network had exceeded everyone's expectations. By teaching veterans to use their military training for community defense, Marcus had created something powerful, a distributed network of highly skilled, highly motivated individuals who could quickly identify and respond to threats against their communities. The training program Marcus had developed drew on his military experience in intelligence gathering, strategic planning, and community engagement. Veterans learned to recognize the signs of astroturfing operations, artificially coordinated social media campaigns, protests with unusually high percentages of out-of-state participants, activist groups with funding that didn't match their supposed grassroots origins, and targeting patterns that suspiciously aligned with real estate development interests. The beautiful thing about this model, Marcus explained to a new group of veteran trainees, is that we're not trying to stop legitimate protest or activism. We're identifying and exposing fake operations that exploit real social justice causes for corporate profit. We're defending the integrity of authentic grassroots movements. Mrs. Patterson had become the network's most effective advocate and fundraiser. At 68, she had thrown herself into the cause with the energy of someone half her age, speaking at veteran events across the country and sharing her story of how professional activists had nearly caused her death for their real estate scheme. When Marcus tried to help that ambulance reach me, he wasn't just saving my life, she would tell audiences. He was defending the principle that human decency matters more than political agendas. That's what we're fighting for in every community where we operate. The network's success stories were mounting quickly. In Boise, veteran-led investigation had exposed a fake environmental group that was actually funded by a commercial development company trying to force a family farm to sell. In Denver, former military intelligence officers had documented how a supposed social justice organization was being used to drive down property values in a historically Latino neighborhood so gentrifiers could move in. But perhaps the most satisfying victory had come in Marcus's own backyard. The Eastside Community Center that Sarah Chin's group had targeted for closure was not only still operating, it had expanded. With the activists' corporate backing exposed and their leadership in prison, the community center had received an outpouring of support from Portlanders who were horrified to learn how close they'd come to losing vital services for veterans and homeless families. Isabella's investigative newsletter, AstroTurf Watch, had become required reading for journalists, community organizers, and political activists who wanted to distinguish between authentic grassroots movements and corporate manipulation. Her subscriber base had grown to over 200,000, and major news outlets regularly cited her investigations into manufactured activism. The Portland case became a template for exposing these operations, Isabella explained during a journalism conference where she was the keynote speaker. Once you know what to look for, the funding sources, the coordination patterns, the targeting strategies, these fake movements become obvious. The challenge is getting people to care about the difference between authentic activism and corporate theater. Tommy's technical innovations had proven crucial to the network's effectiveness. His team had developed software that could analyze social media activity and identify coordinated inauthentic behavior, the digital fingerprints of artificial grassroots campaigns. The tools were made freely available to community organizations and journalists investigating suspicious activist groups. The same techniques the military uses to track foreign disinformation campaigns work perfectly for exposing domestic astroturfing. Tommy explained to a group of computer science students at Portland State University. These corporate operators use the same playbook as hostile foreign actors. They just have better PR firms. Maria's field operations had evolved into a sophisticated intelligence network that could rapidly deploy to communities under attack by manufactured activist campaigns. Her teams of veteran investigators could infiltrate suspect organizations, document their funding sources, and expose their true agendas before they succeeded in driving out local businesses or manipulating property values. The key is speed, Maria told her trainees. These operations depend on moving fast and overwhelming local resistance before people can organize effectively. If we can get accurate information to community leaders quickly, we can usually stop them before they cause lasting damage. The network had also become a powerful force for supporting authentic grassroots activism. By helping communities distinguish between real and fake social justice movements, Marcus's organization was actually strengthening legitimate protest movements by protecting them from being discredited by association with corporate manipulation. Real activists want to know if their movement has been infiltrated or co-opted. Marcus explained to a group of Portland community leaders. Nobody wants to discover they've been used as cover for someone else's real estate scheme. We're helping authentic movements protect themselves from being exploited. The annual Truth and Honor Festival, held each Memorial Day at Lone Fir Cemetery, had become a celebration of community resistance and authentic activism. Veterans, activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens gathered to share stories of successful resistance to corporate manipulation and to honor those who had sacrificed for genuine causes. Standing at the memorial where everything had started, surrounded by hundreds of people who had been inspired by his story, Marcus reflected on how much had changed. What began as one man's humiliation had become a movement that was protecting communities across America from those who would exploit their values for profit. 2 years after being pushed to the ground at a Portland intersection, Marcus Rodriguez stood at the podium of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, Switzerland, addressing delegates from around the world about the growing threat of manufactured activism and corporate manipulation of social justice movements. Honorable delegates, Marcus began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had faced the worst and emerged stronger. What happened in Portland wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a global pattern where powerful interests exploit legitimate social movements to advance their own agendas. Today, I want to share how communities can defend themselves against this new form of corporate colonialism. The invitation to address the UN had come after Marcus's case study had been featured in international journals on human rights and corporate accountability. The Portland operations exposure had led to similar investigations in London, Toronto, Sydney, and dozens of other cities where suspiciously well-funded activist groups had been manipulating local politics for real estate and development interests. Back home in Portland, the transformation was complete and inspiring. The intersection of Burnside and 12th Avenue, where Marcus had first encountered Sarah Chun and David Walsh, now featured a small memorial garden with a plaque reading, "In honor of those who stand for truth when it would be easier to stay silent." Local families had adopted the garden, and it had become a symbol of community resilience against manipulation and deception. Marcus's personal life had also been transformed in ways he never could have imagined during those dark days when his reputation lay in ruins. He had married Jennifer Walsh, a local elementary school teacher who had reached out to support him during the worst of the media attacks. Jennifer, who shared David Walsh's last name purely by coincidence, had been horrified by the activist behavior and had become one of Marcus's most passionate advocates. Their wedding the previous spring had been attended by over 300 people, including Margaret Sullivan, Mrs. Patterson, Isabella, Tommy, Maria, and dozens of veterans whose communities had been saved by the Veterans Community Response Network. The ceremony took place at Lone First Cemetery, at the very memorial where the truth about the activist had finally been exposed. "When I married Marcus," Jennifer had told the gathered guests, "I wasn't just marrying a man who fought for his country overseas. I was marrying someone who came home and continued fighting for the values that make America worth defending: truth, justice, and the protection of those who can't protect themselves." Marcus and Jennifer now had twin daughters, Emma and Grace, who were 9 months old and had become the center of their universe. Marcus often reflected on how his children would grow up in a world where manufactured outrage and corporate manipulation were better understood and more effectively countered than when his own struggle began. Mrs. Patterson, now 70, had become the surrogate grandmother she'd promised to be. She spent several afternoons each week at Marcus and Jennifer's home, helping with the babies and regaling them with stories about their father's courage. "Your daddy," she would tell the girls during feeding time, "showed the whole world that one person with the truth can defeat any number of people with lies and money." The Veterans Community Response Network had grown beyond Marcus's wildest dreams. Operating in 47 states and 6 countries, the organization had successfully identified and countered over 200 astroturfing operations. The network's training programs were now taught at military bases, veteran centers, and community colleges across America. Tommy Chun had become something of a legend in cybersecurity circles, developing tools that were used by law enforcement, journalists, and community organizations worldwide to identify coordinated, inauthentic behavior online. His software had been instrumental in exposing fake activist networks from Michigan to Maharashtra, protecting countless communities from corporate manipulation. "The beautiful thing about this technology," Tommy explained during a TED Talk that had been viewed over 2 million times, "is that it doesn't stop legitimate activism. It protects it. Real grassroots movements want to know if they've been infiltrated by bad actors. Our tools help authentic activists protect the integrity of their causes." Maria Gonzalez had parlayed her intelligence skills into a thriving consulting business that helped communities and legitimate activist organizations identify and remove bad actors from their movements. Her client list included labor unions, environmental groups, civil rights organizations, and community development nonprofits who wanted to ensure their causes weren't being exploited for corporate gain. Isabella Santos had won 2 more journalism awards for her continued investigations into manufactured activism, and her book, AstroTurf America: How Corporations Hijack Social Justice, had become a bestseller and required reading in journalism and political science programs across the country. She still lived in Portland and remained one of Marcus's closest friends and advisors. The fate of the original antagonist served as a cautionary tale that was often cited in business ethics courses. Sarah Chun had served her 18-month sentence and been released to a world where her name was synonymous with fake activism and corporate manipulation. She now worked at a minimum-wage retail job under her maiden name, her nonprofit career permanently destroyed by her conviction and the public exposure of her role in the real estate scheme. David Walsh remained in federal prison, serving the final year of his 3-year sentence. His appeals had all been rejected, and he faced additional civil lawsuits from several of the veterans and families he had harassed. Prison had not been kind to someone whose entire identity was built around attacking people he perceived as weaker than himself. Harrison Wade, the tech billionaire who had funded the operation, had been forced to sell his surveillance software company to pay legal settlements and penalties. His reputation in the tech industry was permanently damaged, and he had retreated to a compound in Montana where he lived as a digital hermit, his social media accounts long since deleted. As Marcus finished his UN address and looked out at delegates from 193 countries, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. What started with a simple request to let an ambulance through had become a global movement to protect communities from those who would exploit their values for profit. In closing, Marcus told the international audience, "I want you to remember that the fight for truth isn't fought by governments or corporations or international organizations. It's fought by ordinary people who refuse to stay silent when they see injustice." Sometimes the smallest act of courage, like asking protesters to let an ambulance pass, can change the world. The applause was thunderous and sustained. But Marcus was already thinking about home, where Jennifer and the babies were waiting, where Mrs. Patterson would want to hear about his speech, and where the memorial garden reminded everyone that truth, once revealed, could never again be hidden. They had pushed him to the ground, thinking it would silence him. Instead, they had awakened a sleeping giant that now protected communities around the world. Sometimes, Marcus reflected with a smile, the best revenge really is living well.